To celebrate this year's annual queer issue of the Link newspaper, the editors hosted a speaker series and slam poetry party at Burritoville. The event featured Jason Crawford, a notable queer activist who also teaches a course on HIV/AIDS at Concordia. He spoke about Montreal's queer history and about how Montreal's gay village used to be right in the heart of downtown.
Today, there are no more Anglophone gay bars in Montreal. There is no more gay downtown. Nearly all the gay bars are situated in the east end of St. Catherine, known as Le Village. So part of what I want to talk about is this resuscitation of a queer cultural heritage of the gay downtown, because we're in danger of losing the stories of our recent past, and because I want to honor the queer cultural performances that took place inside these bars, that created queer space for both a feeling of community and safety, and that spurred political change in Quebec. A legacy that led to gay rights, gay marriage, and now to Montreal celebrating its gay village as the largest in Canada.
Crawford then spoke about one of the darkest and most significant moments in Montreal's queer history, an event which happened at one of the downtown's now-defunct gay bars.
On the night of the 21st of October 1977, Montreal police stormed Le Mystique and the Trucks bar above it. Garbed in military riot gear and armed with matraque and machine guns, they rounded up and arrested 146 men, including Joe, the owner. The charge: presence in a bawdy house. As one of those patrons of that night told us at the closing party for Mystique, she says, "We were scared to death. They dragged us up onto the street and lined us up for everyone to see. They beat us, handcuffed us, threw us in the paddy wagons, and took us downtown, where they continued to beat us and verbally abuse us. We were charged with being in a bawdy house and urged to pay the fine. A lot of those guys were married with kids. Some of them were from the States. Most of them paid the fine and were released. A lot of marriages ended because of that raid. A lot of people lost their jobs because of that raid. But some of us said, this isn't right, they can't do this to us. So we refused to pay the fine. We were eventually released with court dates and had to stand in front of a judge and explain why we were in a house of ill repute. I told the judge that these proceedings were illegal. They had no right to do this to us. For some of us, it took 5 years to get things all settled, but we weren't going to back down. And you all need to know what went on here. A lot of you younger folks don't know what we went through, all the harassment, the scandals, the fear. Some people went back in the closet after that, but a lot of us stood up and fought back. The day after those police raids, 2,000 people blocked St. Catherine Street, causing massive traffic jams and sending the police squads down on the crowd. But this time, the newspapers were there taking photos. And the next morning, every newspaper in Montreal carried front-page coverage of the lutte contre les gays. The pressure was rising. Editorialists were outraged at the police's heavy-handed tactics and came out in support of the gay men who were arrested. Loud public calls for changes in police behavior and changes in the laws continued for months. Out of this one night, the Association des Gays de Montréal was created to help organize fundraisers for legal fees and to continue the pressure. Late in the night that following December, the Parti Québécois government introduced a bill to amend the Quebec Charter of Rights, making sexual orientation a right and freedom in Quebec. This action made Quebec the only region in North America to legally protect gays and lesbians, and it would be a long time before other provinces or even the federal government would follow.
I caught up with the queer issue editors to discuss the annual issue's colored history and ever-changing nature.
Why queer issue in 2010? Because there still are queer issues, but they are evolving. People are starting to self-define within those boundaries, and I mean, it's still an issue. It's still something to be celebrated, and it's still something that people really need to know about.
And also, it's been like a long-standing tradition that the Link has a queer issue. The Link started in 1980, and in 1982 was the very first one.
It was called the gay issue.
It was called the gay issue, and it kind of evolved throughout the times, and like when gay was not allowed to be used, it kind of became the queer issue, but the word
it evolves.
Yeah, I mean, like the word queer kind of like has been used derogatorily against like queer people, but they used it as a term of empowerment, and that's why it's called the queer issue.
In 1982, 15, like pretty much all of the issues of the gay issue were burned.
50 3,000 went missing. They just took them out of the stands and made a big bonfire and just like burnt them. And it was the committee to get rid of all fags.
Yeah,
that's yeah.
And I mean, people in our positions who were like in charge of writing those articles and getting the content together actually received like threats like for like their safety. Like it's really crazy. Like I'm really happy that we don't live in a time like that anymore.
Jason Crawford spoke with us for a few moments about his respect for the Link's queer issue and the importance of recognizing the struggle of trans people.
I think the content was really, really interesting. It's always nice to see trans people's issues covered. It's a really important community who really have suffered a lot of marginalization and erasure. And so when their voices are heard and they get to speak, that's always a really important gain. And I think that the diversity of the issues that get covered every year are really great. I mean, sometimes they're really focused on specific political agendas. This one seems to cover a broad spectrum of different groups, from Two-Spirit to trans artists to the United Nations. So it's a broader coverage this year. Because trans people have been part of the gay movement from the very beginning. I mean, the Stonewall riots were drag queens and trannies. And gay men have claimed that riot as their own, but it was primarily drag queens and trannies who were throwing their high heel shoes at police cars and overturning police cars. So, I mean, it's really important to know that those details of our histories and our past. And trans people have always been amazing artists. They've been, I mean, you look at the history of Saint Laurent Boulevard, lots of transsexual artists performing, and some of them world's famous, and they're traveling around the world to Paris and to London and putting on shows, and there's a really important history there. We are now talking about more visibility of the political and social and cultural and medical issues for trans people, and there's more mainstream attention, which is really good, and we have to seize that opportunity. So if that's if any way that seems like that's the new issue, it's simply because we're getting a lot of attention on it after having spent a long time working on these issues from behind the scenes.
Crawford ended the interview with advice for young queer activists.
I think it's really important that they go to the Montreal Gay or the Gay Archives of Quebec on Saint Laurent Boulevard, call them and make an appointment, sit down with them, talk to them, walk through the miles and miles of newspaper clippings that go all the way back to the early 1900s. Read that history, find out what's gone on in Montreal. See how people dealt with the political situation and what were their strategies for dealing with it. What were the choices that they made, and what were the political and legal outcomes of those decisions. Really understand that history. Also talk to lots of people that are still around. They may not be activists in the streets, but they're in classrooms, they're in their jobs, they're in their community organizations that have been around for 20 and 30 years. And they have lots of fresh memory about what was going on in Montreal and the queer scene in the 90s. And they have a lot of really interesting stories to tell, and they have a lot of lessons to teach.